Good afternoon, Rotarians and guests, and welcome to the Rotary Club of Toledo. I'd like to thank all of you for coming today who are here in the room, and those of you that are joining on Zoom, I'd like to thank you as well. If you have your phones with you today, if you could ensure that the ringers are turned off, and if you would keep them out so that if you hear our speaker talk about something really exciting, you can videotape it and share it with everyone on our social media pages. At this time, I'd like to invite Mary Westfall and Gary Corrigan to come up to deliver the reflection, and Gary will be leading us. I don't know if he's singing, but he'll get us kicked off on the Air Force, Army, Navy, and Marine Corps fight songs, so there'll be no pledge today.
Thank you, President Cindy, and hello, good afternoon, fellow Rotarians. I was asked to lead the prayer today, and although we celebrated Veterans Day on Friday, I was encouraged to focus on Veterans Day today, and of course I was honored to do that. So as I thought about it and searched for reflections, I was moved by a prayer shared by Mark Shockey of the Rotary Club of Minnesota Veterans, and I hope you will be moved as well. Here is what he prayed on Veterans Day last Friday. Join me as we take a moment to prepare our hearts to remember the impact of conflict in our world and the heroes who have fought for the freedoms we enjoy. We pray for those who have lost loved ones. We pray for those who can't forget what they have seen. We pray for those impacted by wars today. We pray for an end to division and hatred. We pray for our armed forces and government. Today, we assemble to give thanks for our veterans, those who have served on our behalf, those who have sacrificed, those who were determined to make a better life for their families and country. We give thanks for their example of service above self. We give thanks for Rotary and our impact upon the world. We ask your blessing upon all those gathered here today and those veterans in our hearts. Grant us all your peace. Amen.
We're going to have a song.
Off we go into the wild blue yonder, climbing high into the sun.
Right now, climb behind
Here
it.
it comes,
Here
here
they
we
come.
are thunder, and boys into the gun. Up we dive, starting up there no longer. Up we one, hell of a roar. We live in fame of a valiant flame. Nothing will stop the U.S. Air Force.
We must not have a lot of Air Force.
Come on, when days on the top, 2, 3, over there we go. You will always know that the army was rolling along. Keep it rolling, every army was rolling.
From the halls of Montezuma to the shores of Tripoli, we find our country's battles in the air, on land and sea. First we fight for right and freedom, and to keep our honor clean. We are proud to claim the title of United States Army.
Thank you very much, Mary and Gary. And I'd also like to give a big shout out to Walt McGee. I'm hoping he's watching on Zoom, but he is the one that puts these videos together and puts all of our PowerPoints together for these meetings, and he spends an endless amount of time on them and does a fabulous job. So if we could give Walt a little round of applause, I'd like to do that. As we begin our meeting, I'd like to acknowledge Impact Product Solutions and Rotarian Gary Murphy as our meeting sponsor for this month. And I'd also like to thank Rotarian Mary Mancini for being the green sponsor. If anyone has any guests today that they would like to introduce, could you please go to the floor mic and introduce them?
I have with me Jim Dettinger Sr., the father of our speaker today.
Right.
I'm pleased to have with me my associate attorney, Josh Eunice. He's in our Eastman & Smith's business transactions section. He started out life as a professional hockey player, and then the law called him and he went to law school.
Oh. What is going on there?
Yeah.
Welcome, Joe and Josh. If Jean Dries is here, if she could come up and give us a little intro and update on our membership drive, Imagine One.
Good afternoon, everyone. Thanks, President Cindy. Just quickly, I think everyone should see a brochure on their table for the new campaign to drive membership called Imagine One. It's pretty self-explanatory, but to try and engage everyone, we're asking that you really ponder and think about bringing a guest either to a meeting or to one of the many social events we're doing. And as you read the brochure, there's something in it for you. Should that person apply, your name will be entered into a drawing for free lunches for a year. So again, just want to put a call out, maybe slow all of us down, including myself, and think about some potential members. Again, bring them to a Monday meeting or any of the fun things we're doing. Thanks.
Thank you, Jean. As most of you know, this upcoming Saturday, we are assisting the district in hosting a peace conference. So at this time, if Kirk Church could come up and give us an update, that would be great.
Doing this 2 meetings in a row, I kind of feel like Arnold Schwarzenegger. I'll be back. Here I am up front. As Cindy just said, on Saturday, this Saturday, November 19th from 9 to 3. I'm not bulked out like he is. I gave up the steroids after college. Stunted my growth. Anyway, this Saturday at the University of Toledo College of Law, at the auditorium, we'll be having a peace conference entitled Finding Common Ground in Uncommon Times. We'll be having 3 keynote speakers and 2 breakouts. The keynote speakers, here we go. Imagine Sustaining Peace in Uncommon Times by Thomas Bowen, Director of Minority and Religious Affairs for the District of Columbia, Washington, D.C. Next would be Transforming Police Culture and Leadership to Promote Peace by Dr. Dan Reinhardt, a retired police lieutenant, now a Southern Baptist Seminary graduate. And then the final person is Billy Joel White, an artist and activist, and owner of the Red Rose Tattoo Parlor in Zanesville, Ohio. He's inspired to give away free tattoos to cover up hatred and racist tattoos at no charge to those who want to have them covered up. The breakout sessions are entitled Voices of African American Officers, Unpacking Equity, Faith Community Responds to Uncommon Treatment, and the Court System and People of Color Just Is. Those 4 breakouts will be repeated twice during the day. Breakfast is included, lunch is included, there's free parking over at UT. You can go to the Spoke to register, and hopefully you'll all be there so we can engage in different communities discussing ways to understand each other and educate each other. Thank you. Yes.
Yeah, we can find out if there's any questions there, Gary. Yeah. Thank you, Kurt, for all your help with coordinating this. And I'd also like to say with those breakout sessions, we have a few Rotarians that'll be speaking. Lisa McDuffie, Maria White, and Judy Leb will be helping us out that day. So I'd like to see all of you out there. And they're also in the Spoke, you'll see a link if you'd like to volunteer, looking for people to help be room monitors, maybe introduce a speaker. So I hope to see most of you there on Saturday. Today, we're lucky to introduce a new member. So if Haas Joseph and Mark Uridia could come to the podium, that would be super.
Up here. You're past that podium. You're on the big podium, the main stage. I was really excited that I tried to sit with him today, but he was so popular, his table was full, so I could not do that. Haas Joseph is an attorney and got his law degree from the University of Toledo College of Law. He founded a law firm, Joseph Law Limited, which is a general practice law firm on Central Avenue near Talmadge about 2 years ago. Prior to starting his own practice, he was an associate for the Advocates for Basic Legal Equality, or ABLE. In his spare time, he likes to play squash, some basketball, and if you're really careful, you'll see him riding down the UT Metro Parks bike trail, I believe. Is that right? Definitely. I've never been invited to go with you. I've been doing that lately too, so we'll meet up there. Very active in the community. He is a second vice president for the Lucas County Bar Association here in Toledo. He is the chair of the board for Pathways, which is a Toledo-based organization that fights every day to reduce poverty by promoting comprehensive services and creating pathways to self-sufficiency. He is the secretary of the board for the Padua Center, which is a Christian-based organization that helps empower Center City residents. Haas is a proud Toledoan and a very dedicated family member. He is the primary caregiver for his elderly parents and pours his heart into his family every day. His pet peeves, he says, is I think that it's very important to be patient in all different types of situations. When impatience shows, it can have a chilling effect on innovation and positive change. Being patient with people is, situations is usually the key to prosperity. Now, he doesn't know this part, but I recently talked to a family member of his, recently, like an hour ago, and I asked him what best describes his cousin. And he said he's extremely caring and passionate about everything that he dives into. He's the kind of guy that takes on the impossible to win, and he wants to make a difference every single day. On a personal note, I had eye surgery recently, and I needed a ride to 20 under 40 because my wife was tied up downtown. And when I called him, he said it would be my extreme honor to chauffeur you to 20 under 40. What a guy. Please help me welcome Toledo's newest Rotarian and my friend Haas Jordan. Or Joseph, sorry.
A little gift for you, Haas, and a new pen. Thank you. Welcome. Thank you, Mark.
Yeah.
Welcome, Haas, and thank you, Mark. All righty. Now I'd like to start off by thanking all of the veterans that are here among us. Despite the risk and sacrifice, these people raise their hands to serve and defend this beautiful country. Our veterans, whether they be active duty service members, guardsmen, or reserves, your service has helped to keep our country and our citizens safe and free. If you're able, I would like for you to come up here and join me at the podium and tell the members of our club what service you were in and what years you served, and that includes our speaker too. So any of the veterans in the room, if you're here, if you could come up.
Am I it?
Are we it? Oh,
Oh,
get
all right,
up
there we
here.
go.
There we
Come
go.
on. All right.
Don't be shy. Come on. Do you want to go first?
Sure. I'll see if I can remember what Cindy said. So Jim Dettinger, I was Toledo Air National Guard, joined that service in '93 and retired in 2016. So flew F-16s in Toledo. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. And worked with Cindy out there.
I'm Tom Euler, and I was drafted into the Army in 1969 and ended up serving a total of 30 years of combined service and reserve forces on an active duty.
Bob Harold, I was drafted in 1963, served from 63 to 65. They sent me to Germany after I went through 16 weeks of training in the artillery survey and forward observer, and I ended up as the battalion photographer.
Here you go, Bob. Thank you.
Nelson Schaefer. I was in the Ohio Army National Guard, joined in March of '84. My end of enlistment date was September 26, 1991. I did combat engineer work and nuclear, biological, chemical defense.
Walt Churchill joined the Marine Corps in 1947, January 14th. Stayed in for 30 years. We were activated. My dad was the commanding officer of the local reserves, and we were activated, and 1,015 of us went to Pendleton, and we were classified of combat ready or whatever. And if you had 3 summer camps, had 80% drill attendance, you were considered combat ready. So it speaks heavily for our training. But anyhow, my dad was full colonel and he didn't get activated for that. And I went over to Korea and spent 9 months there. And we ended up the 1st Marine Division. I was in Charlie Company, first batch 7. Among other things, I got my draft notice while I was over there. Addressed to Sergeant Walter A. Churchill. And, but anyhow, it was an interesting time. Our outfit was up in the Chosin Reservoir, and we were over there when MacArthur was getting a little bit of comeuppance by Truman, and we were pretty well shot up, but as bad as we were, MacArthur thought we should cross the Yellow River, and that would have been another dumb thing to do. But anyhow, he was called back, as you remember. But anyhow, we had a good time, and as Marines, my memories are all good and positive. Thank you.
Good afternoon. I'm Pete Lavalette. I graduated from the U.S. Coast Guard Academy in 1986, and I served in the Coast Guard until 1991. Served on a cutter based out of Alameda, California, and patrolled the Pacific Northwest and parts of that big body of water. So, and I'm going to work with Walt next year to make sure we get the Coast Guard song as part of that video.
I was just going to say that. Cindy Binkley, I was with the 180th Air National Guard from 1982 to 2002. So thank you for all your veterans. Thanks. Oh, you got slow. little slow. Thank you, everybody. I have a couple more things to go through here. I'd like to congratulate Same Cafe and the main library on the grand opening last Friday. Very exciting, and what a great addition to the library and the community. As some of you may have seen some of the advertisement or marketing, it's only the second cafe like this in the nation, and hopefully it'll prompt other cities to do the same thing. So congratulations. I'd also like to congratulate Imagination Station and Keep Toledo Lucas County Beautiful on their achievement of obtaining the Guinness World Record and collecting 20,970 pounds and 1 ounce of glass bottles on the recycling day on November 5th. So this was a big endeavor for them, and it's pretty exciting. Another little check mark for the city of Toledo. And we also are still looking for a few more volunteers to ring the bell at Churchill's in Maumee on Saturday, December 10th. If you go to the Spoke, you'll be able to register there, or you can reach out to Jackie. So just a few more openings there. And now I'm done talking, and I'm going to ask Father O to come up and introduce our speaker, Jim Dettinger.
Thank you. So our speaker is a 1987 alumnus of St. Francis de Sales High School. And for whatever reason, he and I developed a friendship even when he was a student, and it's continued, and I'm very happy about that. He played football and baseball for 4 years in high school. I remember one game, football game, he was in my religion class. And the football game started. There was lightning and thunder, stop, half hour, start again, lightning and thunder, stop, half hour. I think it happened a third time, and I said to him, Jim, if you pray and it stops, you get an A in class. It stopped. And he was also on the team that won the City League Championship that year. So in 1993 to 94, he was the alumni director at St. Francis. And it was very nice to have an alumni director who was a pilot and had access to a nice, small, single-engine airplane. One trip, he was flying me to a small airfield in Pennsylvania. It was an early morning flight after a few cups of coffee, and I overheard him say on the radio, we need to make an unplanned landing. My passenger needs to make a pit stop. He could have said low on fuel, turbulence, something, but. So he left St. Francis, he moved on to the 180th Fighter Wing of the Air National Guard, then Delta Airlines. In 1998, I was privileged to be the minister when he and his wife of almost 25 years married. They've raised 2 daughters and now live in Charlotte, North Carolina. He has a lot to say about the airline industry, so please welcome Captain Jim Dettinger.
Thank you very much, and thank you for having me. It's a pleasure to be here and talk to you all. For the veterans out there, I always talk to the folks when I was doing some recruiting at the 180th. Remember this, the Air Force builds runways, they build a golf course, and then they build billeting. Navy, they build ships, and then they think about a building. The Army gives you a rucksack, at least they give you a shovel so you can build your own foxhole. The Marines just give you a rucksack. And Pete, I have no idea what the Coast Guard does for recruiting, but that's how I try to recruit the guys into the Air Force. So, but thank you for having me. Back in June, Father O asked me to come talk to you, and it's a privilege to be here. And at that point in time, this was 5 days after American had announced that they were going to stop service here in Toledo. And there was a Blade article that I looked at, Dave Patch wrote, and in the article it talked about the Toledo airport and all the airlines that had left, leaving with just AirTran with you to serve. And we'll go through some of the reasons there. But one of the American Airlines representatives stated that it was due to the regional pilot shortage. And we will touch base on that. And I think that became a huge term word for the press and everybody else. It was very easy to blame the folks in the front. Now, I'm not going to say or deny that there is a little bit of a pilot shortage, but when we get into the discussion, you'll see what happened after COVID with not only pilots, but flight attendants, ground agents, air traffic control folks. So it is a huge amount of differences of different areas of the aviation community that actually impacted all of aviation. So American, you know, when they announced that, they also announced that they were going to stop flying in 3 other cities. In 21, they have announced they were going to stop flying in 2 other cities, and they weren't alone. United cut back in 14 cities, Delta cut back in 10 cities, stopping service in 3 altogether. So things due to COVID had changed considerably, and it's put us in a different state pre-COVID and a little bit of a different state from 9/11. So what we'll talk about is we will talk about going back all the way to 9/11, what 9/11, what it had on the travel impact for people, and what it kind of the impact on the airlines, because we talk about bankruptcies and mergers. We call it the lost decade, and I'll describe to you that the number of pilots that we actually lost, the number of folks going into the profession, starting out. When the FAA changed the retirement age from 60 to 65, the impact that had it was more of a progression impact for first officers going to captains than it was for folks getting hired, but there was some impact on the hiring. And then once 14 hit and the wave just started pushing very, very fast, the hiring and attrition between 2016 and 2019 until we hit COVID. And again, we'll talk about the impact, retirements, furloughs. What was really kind of a factor in canceling flights was currencies and lack of industry folks because of COVID restrictions. And then I'll get into a little bit of what we're doing at Delta and our hiring and our pilot recruiting and selection. The majority of the discussion is going to be about majors, so United, American, Delta, mid-majors, Southwest, JetBlue, and the low-cost carriers. The regional airlines, I'll have a little bit of discussion, but that's going to be more along the impact that they've sustained in the end of 21, beginning of 22, when all the majors were just gathering up and gobbling up all of their pilots. For those of us in the room, I think the majority of us remember this day. You could probably remember exactly where we were on this day and what impact it had. It changed everything in the travel industry. It changed everything of how we thought about security, how we thought about traveling, who was traveling with us, were we concerned about who was traveling with us. And if you remember, pre-9/11, we just were able to walk through the security, throw our bag on a belt, and we walked through. Right after, this is what we were looking at. We were looking at armed guardmen and police officers sitting at airports going, not only passengers, but pilots. We had to do the same security procedures. So it changed the entire outlook of flying and how we went to the airport to fly. In November 19th of 2001, President Bush and the 107th Congress signed the Aviation and Transportation Security Act. This was the creation of TSA. TSA has kind of evolved over the years. We have gone from just small security screens into these big body sensors where they're looking at everything. And then we've also had some folks who have tried a few things throughout the years that have changed the way we have to do and what we have to take out of our bags and whatnot. So in 06, I don't know if you remember Richard Reed. He was the shoe bomber. You got it. Exactly right. So in 2006, the TSA said, guess what? Everyone has to take their shoes off. because Richard Reed decided he wanted to try to blow an airplane up in the back lavatory. Also that year, the British authorities, they actually stopped several passengers that they thought were going to get on airplanes heading towards America to blow them up with liquid explosives. So the big bottles of shampoo no longer. We now have the 311 rule, so you can't take any liquids greater than 3.4 ounces. So it has evolved. It has evolved into, I think, a pretty good system right now. And it's going to continue to evolve and change. The way they look at bags, the way they look at passengers, their lists that they have. So whether you know it or not, anytime you book a ticket, you are on a list. And you are cross-referenced. And if there's any red flags, it is notified to the airlines. And every airline security team knows who's on board. Well, what did it do to the airlines? So pre-9/11, I'm going to start out by saying 16 major, mid-major, and low-cost carriers. It was really 15. In 2000, January of 01, TWA for the third time had declared bankruptcy. And at that point in time, American acquired them. But TWA flew under the TWA name until 2003, so I include them in here. So 16 main carriers, and these are U.S. carriers only. Again, I'm not talking about regionals with what happened. But all of these airlines went into bankruptcy. It started in August of 02 with US Air, in December of 02 United, and then a couple years go by, and Northwest and Delta go into bankruptcy in 05. And American, believe it or not, lasted the longest without going into bankruptcy. They didn't declare Chapter 11 until November of 11. But everyone furloughed and everyone contracted. So Delta furloughed 1,800. I was one of those. Northwest 850. United about 2,800, and American furloughed about 3,000 pilots. And out of those 3,000, about 1,250 of those were TWA folks. So what happened at that point in time is when they contracted, that slows growth, all right? It reduces the pool of pilot jobs, and it left a lot of folks wondering whether they were going to stay in the industry or not. I had classmates who went and drove dump trucks. I had classmates who went and worked at Home Depot. I had classmates who went and they were teachers, or they went into whatever their college background was. Guys went and worked in businesses, and some folks did not come back. And one of the reasons was because no one knew what the industry was actually going to evolve into, because everything had shrunk and there weren't any opportunities for pilots. Companies were reluctant to hire furloughed airline pilots because, and I happened to end up at a small company down in Findlay, fortunately, but they were reluctant to hire those guys because they knew if I'm going to spend the dollars to train them and keep them in a couple years, if the airline calls them back, will they stay or not? So kind of an interesting time with the airlines, reducing flying, reducing pilots, and reducing cost structure, essentially, so they could survive. Also in this time frame, we call it the lost decade. So the FAA data, unfortunately, goes back to 07, so I don't have it from 01. But when we look at these are the total number of pilots. So private pilot, a commercial pilot, and an airline transport pilot. Airline transport pilot is what you need to get hired at the airlines. And if you see back in 07, about 211,000, and now today there's 164,000 airline transport pilots. So that number has declined. So has the commercial pilot side. A good note is that the student pilot side has actually increased a bit. There's a couple numbers here that I would like to talk to you about. According to Boeing, there is a need of 637,000 new pilots by 2036. That has to do with growth. Airlines are going to start expanding again, and some of them already are. Delta is one of those, and the attrition rate. All right. Part of the lost decade, I kind of talked to you about when the furloughed guys were furloughed, they decided not to go back to the airlines. There are currently 97 colleges out there that have aviation programs. And what those do is so kids can go to college, go through a professional aviation program, and start working on their licenses and their ratings. So now they can be competitive to try to get hired as an instructor, build time to get hired at a regional, to build time to get hired at a major. Or military, guys go in the military. After 9/11, several of those schools closed. A lot of the mom and pop shops, for example, I got my private pilot's license out at Toledo Aero, at Toledo Express Airport. Those places shut down, a significant number of them, and that had to do with cost. Insurance rates went up astronomically, fuel costs went up astronomically, and quite frankly, people were very concerned about, again, what is this industry going to do? How safe is it going to be for me and my family if I continue on with this career? So we have seen a drop. This has contributed, this along with where I'll talk about in the next slide, where we increase the age, the retirement age from 60 to 65, has contributed to the numbers coming in to fulfill the attrition and the growth. Looking back at those numbers on that last stat, in 2018, there were, sorry, I got to put the cheaters on here. 162,000 airline transport pilot certificates. So 162,000 people had that. About 70,000 of those, so almost half, were age 55 and over. Those folks, they're going to all end up retiring within the next 5 years. So that's a 30% reduction in that number just due to retirements in the next 5 years. In 2007, part of the other issue that we had was following the International Civil Aviation Organization, which the United States is a member of, President Bush signs the Fair Treatment of Experienced Pilot Act. So that's a long verbiage for changing the mandatory FAA retirement age from 60 to 65. So that kept a lot of experienced pilots so the airlines could continue to operate without needing a bunch of new folks coming in. American was the first one that was fairly affected with this. In 2012, they were hitting attrition rates of around 800. And we, at Delta, it wasn't as bad for us. So in 2007 is when that happened. We had about 94 folks retire that year, 60 in 2008, and then we don't have that many retirements for the next several years, which coinciding with the 2008 recession, you can see we don't bring any pilots on in 2009, 11, 12, and 13. So we're trying to keep that pool small, but now all of a sudden, starting in 2014, these numbers, this graph here is all Delta specific. So 2014 is where we saw a lot of different things happening. That's where Delta started seeing the numbers increase on retirements. Again, we were sitting around 300, 416, 417, and that was going up. And we're going to be about 500 a year at Delta, where American was about 800 a year. So their need is going to be a little more. And United is right in between us. They're probably around 700 or so. But the growth really started hitting in 14, and you can see we started hiring over 1,000 by 2016, and by 2017 roughly around 1,000. Now it backs off in 18, and the reason for that is we have this pool of pilots, and I'm generating these numbers specifically for Delta, but every airline is kind of run into the same issue. So we have this pool of pilots. We've hired all these folks. Well, the pipeline to get into the simulators and getting your training done is a lot smaller than that big pool of people waiting. So now as the training pipeline gets backed up a little bit, we can only get so many people through there. We hold off on some hiring again in the latter part of 18 and 19. That's why those numbers are a little low. 2020, those 410 hires has to do with, that was 2 months worth of hiring. I was on the hiring team at the time. We were interviewing little over 200 a month, and we were bringing in that 200 a month. The retirement of the 2114 has to do with post-COVID early retirement packages. And every airline did the same thing. So we only brought in the 400 and we had 2,000 depart, and that is a huge hit for anyone to try to recover back. Even with the reduced flying, that was happening. Speaking of COVID-19. So COVID-19 was a completely different animal than 9/11. Every airline essentially went into panic mode. Every airline, we essentially stopped flying. Our post 9/11 passenger embarkments decreased about 33% post 9/11. They decreased 96% in COVID. We lost everything as in passengers, revenue. And the problem with it was a great unknown because no one knew. And it changed. The CDC kept changing. Oh, we don't need a mask. We need a mask. We can be 6 feet. No, it's 3 feet. It was different. And it was different for everybody. So the projection from the airlines was a 3 to 5 year recovery. Delta alone parked over 700 airplanes. So roughly about 800 and some airplanes in our fleet now. Well, we parked 700 of them. International flying went down to absolute nothing. Warn letters, which is the government requires companies to, if they think they're going to furlough a pilot, they have to give them a warn letter. So we sent out 2,500 projected furloughs. The bailout helped. We were able to keep those guys, but here's the catch. They weren't flying. They went on to what's called an unassigned status. So for 2 years, many of those 2,500 pilots sat at home and got paid. Every airline did the same thing. American Airlines offered leave packages, 6, 12, 24-month packages, reduced flying packages just to try to save money. United recontracted their pay scale so they could keep everyone flying. But, we essentially stopped flying. For example, out of those 700 airplanes, I'm a 717 pilot in Detroit, Michigan. That fleet, there was Detroit, Michigan had a base, and Atlanta, Georgia had a base. The fleet had 91 aircraft. In April of 2000, we were down to 45. So we'd cut half of our flying. And this is where we're going to get into where we start seeing cancellations and why we started seeing cancellations. So in Detroit, in April and May of 2000 and actually into June, there was absolutely no flying in my fleet whatsoever. There was not one scheduled flight on those airplanes. Every 90 days, you need to fly and have 3 takeoffs or landings to stay current, okay? So with no flying, guys were going non-current. Go back to the training department, and typically if you go non-current, what happens is you go down and fly and get into a simulator and you do your 3 takeoffs and landings, you do a few emergency procedures, you work on single engine procedures and whatnot. Well, the training department couldn't do it because of the COVID restrictions. The campus was vacant. Everyone was working from home. And then, if you remember, we were doing this in airplanes, right? We're sanitizing airplanes just to get people back. Well, they had to do the same thing in the sims. And they had to try to figure out, how do I get 3 people in a simulator, because it's 3 people to get the thing running, and worry about space. or worry about if they're sick. The COVID restrictions for what we had at Delta, and this happened to me 3 separate times. The first time I was exposed only, didn't have it, to my daughter, so I was home for 2 weeks. The second time I flew a 5-day trip with a guy. He came home from that trip. He went in and got tested. I was home for 3 weeks. The next time, a couple months later, my daughter, I was obviously living at the same house, and they couldn't guarantee that I can remain separated 4 weeks. So that was the response that we were getting from the guidance from our health department and the CDC on how we needed to react to that. Now, you've got guys and gals who are not able to fly. So guess what happens? Cancellation, cancellation, cancellation. That was just kind of the way the industry was. So it was a completely different animal than 9/11. 9/11, no one had to worry about whether I had to sit 6 feet away from someone, or I can only have so many people on an airplane, or if I'm a flight crew and I'm exposed, I now have to stay in my hotel for 2 weeks on the, I was planning on an overnight in Rochester. Now I'm there for 2 weeks. So that's the big difference. We came out of that and we started seeing passengers start coming back. So these numbers are Delta specific. 2019 at the peak, we had 162 million passengers for the year. 2020, we went down to 54 million. We lost 60%, 67% of our total. Last year, we were back up to 100 million. We don't have numbers yet for this year. I can tell you industry-wise, 2019, the total industry number of passengers, 927 million. 2020, it dropped to 370. 21 went back up to about 675. And as of today, we're at about 650 million passengers as of today. So we'll be back close to that 900 million, especially with Thanksgiving and Christmas coming up. But what we look at too is our load factors when we see whether things are ginning back up. So what the load factor is what's the percentage of the airplane that's full? So typically around the 80s, mid 80s. 2019 is our peak at 86.3. We dropped down to 55% of the airplanes being full. And last year at 69. Right now our load factors since April, this is Delta only, since April our load factors are above 90%. We're filling them up like crazy. So we're starting to get back. You talk about pilots. I'm sorry, these are daily departures. Weekly departures. You saw 2019, roughly a couple 100,000 a week. That drops down to just under half after COVID, and then 21, you're starting to see that increase. We're flying about 4,300 flights a day at Delta. Everyone's around 3,000 to 4,000 flights a day, so it's coming back. The problem is, what we related to at the beginning of the talk was, where are we getting them from? So in April through June of 21, I was on a team where we were revamping our hiring, the way we hired, or not the requirements, just kind of the way we ran our hiring of new pilots. So we were anticipating to hire folks starting in October, November timeframe. In August, the management team said, nope, you're going to start September 1st, get at it. So we were scrambling. So in 2021, we started interviewing again in September. In 2 months, we had interviewed over 1,200 people, and in 4 months, we had hired over 800 people. In 21, United hired 1,300 people. American hired 600 people. So that's within a 6-month time frame, because I think American started in June and July, and United was really close. Where'd they all come from? The regional carriers. So we just essentially, the majors took out all of their pilots. And why did they leave? They left for pay and work rules. So now you're starting to see the regional carriers who are just, they are really hurting for pilots right now, trying to give incentives. bonus programs, signing bonuses, and then bonus programs if you stay and flow through to a major. But it's just, they are really hurting. And what that hurts is the smaller cities, you know, where they were flying. Toledo is a complete example of that. So when American left, and they said in that article, yeah, it had to do to our pilot shortage, there is a lot of truth to that. Majors are doing very well. They're getting back up to where we were in 2019 numbers, and definitely there for the pilots. I can't speak to what's going to happen to the regionals. I think the cycle will work itself out. They'll be sticking around. It just might be at a smaller capacity. We'll finish with pilot training. So in the pilot hiring and selection, I left the selection and hiring team and went to the recruiting team. I was just in Fort Worth a few weeks ago where we were working with RTAG. That's the Rotary to Airplane group. So it's a big military group. At that job fair, 5,700 people looking for work. So the numbers are there. 5,000 of those folks were military, 700 civilian, and all those civilian, they were regional guys trying to get on to the majors. And a lot of those airlines at those job fairs are hiring. We do not. We project, say, hey, give this person a call. But American and United were actually hiring on the spot. Pilot training is where we'll finish. I talked to you about when we had this huge pool of folks and we have this smaller line to get them trained. And then when they had all the restrictions that we had during COVID to keep guys current, another thing that happened was we retired a lot of pilots, and there was a lot of instructors that retired. So now not only are we looking for pilots to hire, and the airlines are looking for that, but we're looking for instructors to instruct the pilots to hire. So it's the wheel is in motion, essentially. We are offering folks, if we offer folks a job, it's 14 weeks in between the job offer to get to what we call indoctrination, which is 10 days of school where you learn all the company policies and procedures, and then anywhere between 2 to 6 weeks to get into the simulator. That's just how backlogged the training department is right now. We have a total of there's 38 sims. And they run 6 different periods from 5 a.m. to 1 a.m. They have 4 hours down for maintenance, and they are full. Every session is full with folks going through. And that projection, again, is going to continue. They are still always hiring folks to do instructors. I have a good friend, just retired from American. He actually got hired by Delta Professional Service to go be a 777 captain at FedEx. So those guys are in the same boat. FedEx has 200 instructors with X number of 777s sitting on the ramp, and they want those guys to go fly the airplanes to generate revenue instead of just instructing, so they're bringing folks in off the street. And every airline's doing that right now. So I would say, you know, post 9/11 versus post COVID, completely different scenarios, as the comeback for COVID was a lot quicker than I think the airlines thought it was going to be, and they lost a lot of numbers in trying to fill that attrition in. It'll end up evening itself out. It's just a matter of when. The majors will be sooner than the regionals. So with that, I am done talking about kind of the quick overview of the airline industry, and I'll take any questions if you have them.
These 3.
Yes, speak into the microphone, I was told to tell you. Oh, sure.
So with all of the, I guess, workforce issues surrounding the airline industry right now, do you see AI playing a role in filling that gap, or how do you
So there is a lot of talk about AI. In fact, the military actually does train to some AI, believe it or not. That has not hit the commercial aviation world. I think it will. And that has to do with sim availability and getting folks, you know, checked out in the sims and being able to branch out that pipeline to increase the numbers. You can't do it all that way, okay? And that's FAA driven on the type of simulator that you need to complete all your training and to be able to get certified in that airplane, all right? But you most certainly, and I know they're working on, like, we have procedures on how we set up the airplane when we first get into the airplane. We have checklists that we run before we start the airplane. We have checklists that we run after we start it. Those, what we call flows and checklists, most certainly you can learn those AI, and that's what they're looking into. Now, getting the government to approve all that and to make that part of the training, that'll be another hurdle they'll have to figure out.
Thank you.
Thank you.
I have two questions.
Okay.
The first is, there's been over many years concerns or stereotypes about the quality of the air on airplanes. So can you speak to what it really is?
Sure. Every airplane that I know, well, every airplane at Delta, and I believe American and United are the same, have a better HEPA filter than the hospital here in Toledo. The air on my airplane doesn't get recirculated. It starts in the front and goes all the way through. It's a constantly new, fresh air that's going through. There are some airplanes that do recirculate, okay, but the filters that they have on there are as quality as you're going to get in a hospital. So I would really venture to guess that it'd be very tough for you to get anything unless someone actually sneezed on you and you.
Right.
Okay?
Right. And I would imagine a lot of it on the airplanes would be contact surfaces like the tray tables and stuff.
Like walking out that door after 50 people have done the same thing.
Right, exactly.
Correct. So where do the viruses live? Where do you go and grab?
Right.
Well, I mean, I washed my hands constantly before COVID. And the insides of those airplanes, there's dust, there's dirt, there's, you know.
Yeah.
But yes, if you take care of yourself and you're very hygienic, you will be fine. And this is
Okay. My second question, recognizing you are not the accountant at Delta, is oftentimes we get to an episode like COVID or something, and there's a great deal of government support that goes out to the airlines in general. Does any of that ever come back to the government after we get to all the extra fees, all the, the revenue has come back up, et cetera, and things have returned to something approaching normal when that support is not required anymore?
I do not know how the setup of the loans work.
Okay.
I can't answer that question.
Okay, because I know you're paid to fly, not account beans.
That is for the folks, we call it the fourth floor. That's our guys. I'll let the guys on the fourth floor. So I do not know how the government loans were set up with each airline.
Okay.
I'm sorry.
Thank you.
Yep, you bet.
I'd like to hear your take on the international airlines and, for example, China, where they have a couple of people get COVID and they shut the whole city down. What's the international situation look like?
Well, I can tell you right now, I mean, I know the folks that fly to Incheon, they're not allowed to leave their room. They are stuck in their room for 36 hours. They are, they have a hotel employee bring them food, sits out in front of their room, and they knock on the door, they leave, and that's how. So every crew member in Incheon, that's their overnight. International's been a big struggle because every country is different. So can I go there? If I go there, what can I do? What can I do? Do I have to wear a mask? Am I allowed to come back to the States? Those have all changed over the last year. And in fact, what was it? April, where we stopped the whole mask mandate. But if you were coming from some foreign places, you weren't even allowed to enter the U.S. So and that's a very evolving thing. Australia was very strict. China, Korea, very strict. At first, I think Italy and Paris were the same. We're just starting to branch out to go back to those cities. Our international is starting to actually grow. I have not seen anything on our website stating, here's what you have to do, but I know there are travel requirements. Since I don't do that on a regular basis, I don't know what, it's different everywhere, we'll put it that way. And some are more restrictive than others.
Thanks.
So, yep.
Thank you for a wonderful conversation today. I remember the first time I was on an airplane flying down to Florida. I got my little wings. I still have them somewhere in my dresser.
I have some here too, if you like.
I would love to double my collection. That'd be great. For a kid who's always been so fascinated with the cockpit, I have two questions. Well, one about the cockpit, one about the airplane. What's the coolest thing about the cockpit that we don't know as travelers on our side of the airplane?
Know that answer?
I do. My second question is how to be comfortable in the middle seat. Thank you.
Fly first class, and that way you don't have to worry about the middle seat. Okay. The coolest thing about, oh boy, the view. I mean, and that's why I did it. It's the best office in the world. You know, I would have to say it's the view. And not only seeing things from 36,000 feet, but seeing things, you know, from 6,000 feet. So I think that's the coolest thing. I really do. So.
And I have two questions also. One is, what is the makeup of the aircraft in Delta's fleet?
I knew someone was going to ask that question.
Well, it doesn't have to be exact.
All right.
I mean, generally, what are you flying?
Okay, so we have A350s. That's the Airbus 350. We have A330s. We have 767. All right, we have, here it is, 848 airplanes, and we have 366 on order. All right. 76ER. Now that is a 767-300 extended range. So that is typically doing Detroit, Amsterdam, Detroit, Paris, or Detroit, Sao Paulo. I flew that airplane a lot from Detroit to Sao Paulo. 45 of those. 76400, which is a stretch 7600, we have 20 of those. A330s, okay, we're looking at 50 of those with 20 on order. And the 350, we have 19 with 18 on order. The 717 that I fly, we have 64 back in the fleet. Remember I said we had 91. We'll be at 85 by next summer. We're actually waiting on engines on those. 737s, let's see, roughly 200 on property with 100 MAX 10s on order.
So speaking of the MAX, what's going on with the 737 MAX these days?
It's flying. It's making money. It's doing great. I mean, I think they fixed that glitch. They trained the pilots, and they're going at it. I mean, Boeing has a lot of issues. They should have addressed things. That's a completely different topic. No, I mean, I think they took care of the issue, and it's flying. And we don't have them yet, so I don't know anyone who flies them. So I can't tell you how it handles or what it's like. That I just don't know. But then our Airbus fleet's roughly about 160 with another 140 coming, and that's the small 319s, 320s, and our 75's about 120. So we're going to retire our 75s and 76s here within the next few years. So that order where I said we have 39,000 new airplanes coming in the next X number of years, airlines are going to retire a certain number of them also. So, but any other questions? Great. Thank you.
Am I still on? Yep. So some of you might not know that Jim flew up here today just to speak to us. So I think that says a lot about how he feels about Toledo. I'd like to give you this book, Historical Tales of Toledo, that was written by one of our past presidents, Clinton Mauck. Awesome. And we also will be making a donation in your name to our Polio Plus Fund.
Excellent. Thank you very much.
Thanks a lot.
It's great.
Not only were we at the 180th together, we started out knowing each other very young, riding the bus to St. Joe's and Maumee. We were both carpenters. We were going to play a great video that aired on Fox 36 today, but we're running out of time, so we'll kick off our meeting next Monday with that. Next week, we'll be here in the library again, and we have joining us Justin Ambergy, the owner-operator of 2 Chick-fil-A's locally, the one on Airport Highway and the one on Central and McCord. He'll be unpacking the secret sauce behind their quick service, so I'm hoping to learn a lot about that. There are 3 committee meetings today. Membership will be meeting in here, as well as Peace Subcommittee, and the Program Committee will be meeting down by the parking garage. I thank you all for coming today, and thank you very much for speaking to us today, Jim.